Welcome to another video from explainingcomputers.com. This time I'm going to explain different Linux packaging formats, including Deb, RPM, Flatpak, AppImage and Snap. These are the primary means of distributing and installing Linux applications, and so it can be useful to understand how they differ. To install a Linux application, you can either obtain the source code from a site like GitHub and compile it yourself, or use a package for the application that somebody else has prepared. A Linux package is a file that contains an archive of all of the necessary files for a particular application. Most Linux applications are available in several package formats, and the one you use does not alter core program functionality. Most types of Linux package are installed using a package manager, which also handles removal and updating. So, for example, Debian and most Debian-based Linux distros use a package format called Deb, which is managed by a high-level packaging manager called apt. And, in turn, apt calls on the low-level tool dpkg. Here, Deb stands for Debian, which was formed from the names Deborah and Ian, as the founder of Debian was called Ian, who had a partner called Deborah. So, in a sense, a Deb package is actually a Deborah. More conventionally, APT is an acronym for the Advanced Packaging Tool, whilst dpkg is short for Debian Package Manager. Meanwhile, Red Hat Enterprise Linux, Fedora and related distros use a package format called RPM. And these typically use a high-level package manager called DNF, which relies on the lower-level RPM package manager. The RPM package format and RPM package manager are also used by OpenSUSE, although here the high-level package manager is called Zyper. RPM initially stood for Red Hat Package Manager, but has evolved into a recursive acronym. Meanwhile, DNF stands for Dandified Yum, reflecting that it's a modern version of an older tool called Yum, or the Yellow Dog Updater modified. When a package manager is used to install a Linux application, it needs access to its package file. This can be a local file provided by the user. However, a package manager usually obtains package files from an online server known as a repository. Both Deb and RPM have many repositories available. For Deb, this includes the official Debian repository, which contains around 70,000 packages. Meanwhile, there are official RPM repositories for Fedora, Red Hat Enterprise Linux and OpenSUSE. It's worth noting that if you install Deb or RPM packages from their official repositories, they should be automatically updated. To see how all this translates into reality, let's go across to Linux Mint, which is one of the most popular Linux distros to use Deb as its system packaging format. Like most desktop distros, Linux Mint has got a graphical software manager, which we can use to search for applications. So let's search for Isle Riot, the Solitaire program, and if we click on that, there it is. We can see this is listed as a system package, which means that it's available to install using the system's default package manager. So here, if we now clicked on install, apt would be used to install the application from a Deb package. However, for now I'm going to close this down and we're going to launch a terminal so we can dig under the hood. Here, if we wanted to install a Deb package, we would first start with this command, sudo apt update, with sudo standing for superuser-do, meaning that we're going to execute the command as an administrator, and apt being the advanced packaging tool. Finally here, update tells apt to obtain information from its configured repositories on the latest available Deb packages. It's therefore a good idea to run an apt update before an application install. So let's execute the command, and it'll want my password. There we go. And now to install ailriot, we can enter sudo apt install ailriot. Here we go. Very exciting. And there we are. It has finished. And if we now look in our menu, we go to Games. There it is. We have got the Solitaire package, which I will avoid the temptation to play. And indeed, if we wanted to remove it, we could use this command, sudo apt remove ailriot. And there we are. It has gone. It's no longer in our Games menu. Now, having used apt to install and remove a Deb package, let's transition across to Fedora, where the default packaging format is RPM. Here we also have the software manager that provides a graphical interface for installing packages. But once again, let's close this down and open up a terminal where, to do exactly what we just did, we would first enter sudo dnf check update, which is the syntax for checking updates to RPM packages using the DNF package manager. Following which, to install the ailriot application from an RPM package, we enter sudo dnf install ailriot. And there we are. Once again, we've installed Solitaire. Hopefully it's in our menu under Games. There it is. It is new. We will just check it's there. It most certainly is. Although also once again, we'll remove it, where here the syntax is sudo dnf remove ailriot. And there we are. Sadly, Solitaire is no longer on this system. Deb and RPM are known as native packaging formats, as they're tightly integrated into the operating system. In practice, this means that they install files in system directories and rely on shared system libraries. In this table, I've listed the top-level directories in which Deb, RPM, and other native packaging formats will typically place an application's files. So, when you install a Deb or RPM package, its component files get spread quite liberally around your Linux system. If we return to Linux Mint, we can easily check where files have been placed. To do this, in a terminal, we can enter dpkg-l followed by the package name to list the locations of its installed files. So, for example, we could enter dpkg-l, and that's a capital L, and then LibreOffice Writer. And if we press enter, the magic will happen, and we can now see the location for all the files installed for LibreOffice Writer, which reside, as we can see, in many system folders. Like other native packaging formats, Deb and RPM have a number of advantages. For a start, by using shared system files, they minimize the drive space required for installation. And they can launch more rapidly. In addition, native packaging formats may provide a more consistent desktop experience as applications share system themes and fonts. This all said, there are drawbacks. Not least, sharing system libraries can lead to dependency hell, which is where installing one application breaks another if it installs a different version of a shared library file. Native packaging formats are also tied to particular Linux distributions, which means that, for example, a Deb file cannot be installed on an RPM-based distro and vice versa. Because of these limitations, a second category of Linux packaging format is known as universal, with common examples being Flatpak, Snap, and AppImage. Here, applications do not share system library files, although depending on the format, dedicated runtimes may be shared, as I'll shortly discuss. Dependency problems are subsequently avoided. But more drive space is used, and there may be poorer desktop integration. Probably the most popular universal packaging format is Flatpak. This is sandboxed with each application running in its own isolated container. Applications do not share system libraries, but to save drive space, they do share Flatpak runtimes. A runtime contains fundamental libraries and other files, such as those for graphics and audio. To run Flatpaks, the core Flatpak package must first be installed, and the FlatHub repository must also be added, as this is the main source of Flatpak applications and runtimes. Most Linux distros don't include Flatpak by default, although it is included in some distros, including Linux Mint and Fedora. So, if we go across to Linux Mint, where in the software manager I've searched for GIMP, the GNU Image Manipulation Program, we discover that it's available to install either as a system package, which here means a deb, or as a Flatpak from the FlatHub repository. And similarly, in Fedora's Software Center, we have the option to install GIMP from either the Fedora Flatpak or FlatHub repositories, or as an RPM package obtained from the official Fedora repository. It should be noted that when installing an application where multiple package formats are available in your software manager, it's always worth checking which is the most up-to-date, as here in both Fedora and Linux Mint, the Flatpak is far more recent. And just to prove that to you, if we go to System Package here, the deb in Linux Mint, we get GIMP 2.10, whereas if we select the Flatpak, we install GIMP 3.2.4. It's also worth noting that if your graphical software manager supports Flatpaks, it will probably update them for you as security fixes and other changes are released. However, if your software manager does not do this, or if you're uncertain, or if you set your software manager not to receive Flatpak updates, which is what I've done for this test, you can manually update all Flatpak applications by opening a terminal like this and entering this command: Flatpak update, and of course press enter and then Y to accept changes. And there we are, all of the Flatpak packages have been updated. Moving on, Snap is a universal packaging format created by Canonical, the publishers of Ubuntu. It's therefore not a surprise that if we go across to Ubuntu and open up its App Center, by default it installs Snap packages. As an aside, the Ubuntu App Center can also install debs, as Ubuntu is based on Debian. However, out of the box, Ubuntu does not support Flatpak. Like Flatpak, Snap is a containerized format, with each application running in its own isolated sandbox with shared runtimes but no shared system libraries. Snap has a centralized repository called the Snap Store, which is run by Canonical. And because Canonical is a commercial organization, this is not popular with some advocates of open source software. It is indeed for this reason that Linux Mint, which is based on Ubuntu, uses deb as its default packaging format and has blocked Snap. To install Snap packages, the Snap daemon or snapd needs to be installed. The Snap daemon is pre-installed in Ubuntu as well as in many distros based on Ubuntu, including Zorin OS. And on any system with the Snap daemon installed, Snap packages are automatically updated. Finally, we come to AppImage. This is a universal packaging format that by default is not containerized, so has no sandboxing to isolate applications from the rest of the system. However, applications do run entirely independently, as they do not require a core package to be installed and do not share system libraries or runtimes. Rather, app images are single files that you can download, make executable, and run, with no package manager or installation process being required. As a consequence, there is no official app store or repository, with a lot of app images being downloaded directly from application websites or GitHub. A key advantage of app images is true portability. However, they're not automatically updated with the user having to manually download a new version of the package. To see AppImage in action, let's return to Linux Mint, hello, where we're going to visit the website for the VeriCrypt encryption application and click on Downloads, where if we scroll down under Linux, we can find, oh look, the VeriCrypt AppImage file. So let's click to download it, like that, and we'll save it here in my test folder. There it is, nice small file, and if we open up that folder, there's the file, and before we use it, we have to make it executable, which we do by right-clicking, going down to Properties, going across to Permissions, and by Execute, clicking on the little box to allow executing file as a program. And if we now close that down and double-click the file, here we are running the VeriCrypt application. We've now looked at Deb, RPM, Flatpak, Snap, and AppImage. However, many other Linux packaging formats exist, some of which I've included in this table. But which should you choose? Well, there's still a lot to be said for native formats like Deb and RPM, as these are well supported for their respective distro families. Meanwhile, Flatpak is often considered the best universal format, not least due to its strong sandboxing. Personally, because I still mainly run Linux Mint, I generally install Deb packages. The main exception is where this would deliver a very old version of an application, in which case I choose Flatpak. Although, for applications I need to be totally portable, such as anything I run from a USB drive, I also use the occasional AppImage. Oh, and on the machines on which I run Ubuntu, I use Snap. Having some knowledge of different packaging formats can improve your Linux experience. However, my final piece of advice is not to get too concerned about which particular packaging format you use to install a particular application, as the most important thing has to remain the application itself and not how it got on your computer. But now that's it for another video. If you've enjoyed what you've seen here, please press that like button. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe, and I hope to talk to you again very soon.